As long as you want to. Oh, g'day everybody. Welcome to Esport Friday and my guest, Chris Smith. Welcome to you as we went live saying, how long does this go for? It goes for as long as people stay and watch, really, Chris. So, Chris,
Good.
Welcome to you. Cameron, welcome to you. But Chris, first to you, welcome to the Sports Community live stream.
Thanks, man. Happy to be here.
Yeah, very excited. And Cameron, just before we delve deeply into a topic that I'm really interested about, which I think lots of our loyal followers will be interested in as well. But they're also interested, Cam, in the feedback that you're getting from your mum on how well your live stream is progressing on a weekly basis.
Now, last week there was a small distraction from the feedback because it was all focused on the incredible announcement from the Women's World Cup that it took me 4 days to recover from. So I think the attention was slightly distracted away from Sports Community's broadcast last week. So no feedback to go on, but I'm sure my mother is very excited to hear all about Chris Smith and Big Esports.
So, Chris, tell us about Chris Smith and tell us about Big Esports and your journey through esport, and that kind of will take us to our conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure, man. So for me, I've been around in the industry for just over a decade now, starting off in around 2008 as a top-level player, and I've kind of sat on all six sides of the fence within esports, really. So if you were to run, say, a large esports event, I've been there as the player. I've played top level in 3 different titles. I've been there as a player manager. I managed one of Australia's first professional gamers. I've been there as the sponsor. I did 6 years in PR and marketing for 2 different companies, one Taiwanese, one US, making computer components like gaming keyboards and internal computer products. I was a journalist for about a year and a half as well. And also, doing a lot of freelance work too. And I kind of kicked off the industry being a commentator. So I've kind of been there in every single aspect. I've had my run in running tournaments up to $30,000 prize pool and such in the past too. So, kind of been around the traps. And for me, over 10 years, it was me thinking I found the right place for me. I found the right fit for me every time. I thought, yep, being a player, that's where I want to be. Yep, being a commentator, that's where I want to be. Being a journalist, that's where I want to be. And what I realized is that instead, I actually wanted to work on the industry instead of working in the industry. So where we sit today with Big Esports, we're based out of Melbourne, Australia. A lot of our work is global these days, and we're focused on bringing new ideas and new companies into the space. So Australia specific, we've worked in the past with Fox Sports on an esports entry strategy. And I've worked with a few sports as well on how they might be able to activate on the market, both local and some of the big ones. And globally, we're also working with a lot of brands on how they can enter into the gaming market, whether they're a sponsor or whether they've got a business interest or want to open a new business line in the space. And then besides that, we also do a lot of work in the influencer space as well, working with YouTubers and Twitch streamers and Instagrammers on advertising and sponsorship possibilities.
Well, and working on the industry instead of in the industry, I guess, takes us nicely into where I'd like to go, because over recent times, traditional sport, peak bodies, and local associations have started to come to you and talk about how they can introduce gaming formats, tournaments, participation options into their audience. And do you want to just tell us a little bit about that? Because just before you do, it's been a very long theme of our 11-week journey in esport, Cam, that the convergence between traditional sport and esport, COVID has accelerated that, but it was always going to happen anyway, I think. And I think you're living that experience, and it's really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess, I think part of the discussion that you and I have had in the past is sorting out what quote unquote problems that the sport wants to solve. So, if you're looking at some sports that are, say, struggling to get attendance through the gate pre-coronavirus, Cricket Australia, how can they activate on the gaming and esports market to be able to fulfill their needs? If you're looking at, say, the NBL, for example, their team, some of the local Melbourne teams, they're selling out their 6,000 to 8,000 seat Melbourne stadium. And obviously to go from that to the next stage is a really big jump. So maybe they could use gaming or esports as a potential extra revenue line. Maybe they can open up a new business in the space, start an esports team, do some content. if you're thinking about, say, golf, for example, the average PGA Global Tour fan, I believe, is either 55 or 65 years old. So that means that they're going to want to reach out to a younger audience. So how can they use gaming and esports to, maybe run some Fortnite, which is in no way relevant or directly related to golf, but it's what the kids enjoy. So can you get them on the grounds playing Fortnite while they've been begrudgingly dragged along by mum and dad to have a great time while they're sitting there? So just thinking about those things. And like you were saying about, about esports giving its time to shine, I think that, pre-coronavirus, there was some sort of murmurs of esports being activated within the traditional sports market. We saw the V8 Supercars has been doing quite a lot in the past with esports pre-coronavirus. The NRL Grand Final last year had a Fortnite competition based just outside the stadium. And we've seen some little smatterings here and there from the AFL and from other sports in Australia, and then overseas as well. A lot of NBA players, a lot of NFL players, a lot of MLB players investing into esports teams personally, and also partnerships between like Manchester City and FaZe Clan, who's the largest esports team in the world. The Pittsburgh Steelers and launching the Pittsburgh Knights, an NFL team over in the States, and various other partnerships too. But you're right in saying that, like with coronavirus, it's been absolutely accelerated. We've seen in Australia, for example, who really took the bull by the horns was probably the Supercars, where they did they got literally every single traditional racing player or driver into the game to play online against each other. And they set up, and I had Nathan Pendergrass, their head of TV, on, and he said, we set it up exactly like, you would look at a traditional broadcast. Same commentators, same camera angles, same sounds. And, if you didn't look closely, because the graphics are pretty good in games these days, you wouldn't actually be able to tell. If you just showed this to someone in 3 years' time, they'd go, oh, yeah, that's around at, Phillip Island or wherever. But it's not. It's all online. And, we saw other things like MotoGP do some things at home, some different FIFA-style tournaments. We saw a little bit of smatterings from baseball coming into the space too. Formula One, they ran not the Oz GP, because the Oz GP was the first ever thing to be cancelled, when coronavirus kicked off. So they ran not the Oz GP, and then not the Bahrain GP and things like that too. So yeah, there's been a lot of interest, and some of it has been, hyper competitive, hyper professional, like NASCAR and supercars with real life drivers playing. Some of it's been a little bit more casual, like MotoGP, where it was, I think, 8 professional riders just playing on a console, just talking a bit of smack, having a bit of fun on a stream together.
So, and Cam, you introduced us to the MotoGP and the motorsports very early on in the live streams, which was really cool. If you're watching on the live stream, join the conversation. Just type into the chat, say hello, say good morning, and ask any question that you like. So, Chris, what are they asking? A number of the peak bodies and associations coming to you. What do they want to do, or what are they exploring the option of doing with esport?
So a lot of the time, the question, like with you could say like I believe is it called the Big Four sports, AFL, NRL, cricket, etc. So outside the Big Four, often the question always is, how can I cost effectively do something within this space to activate on my community? To get them excited and together. So some of the work we've done with baseball in the past is just theorizing about running a tournament. So can we get the kids, especially when they're not able to get on field, can we get them to be playing a baseball game against each other online, representing their local club, and playing in some sort of regular format of a season over that? Because part of what talking to them about is that, the kids and the parents want some normalcy back in their lives, where they're doing the, say, Thursday night training, the Saturday morning game time. They don't have those things to look forward to anymore. And I remember as a kid, I used to be a massive cricket fan. And I remember leaping out of bed, like when I was in grade 6, being like, Saturday morning is cricket day. I'm so excited. But, they don't have those things, and they don't have that connection with their community anymore. And, the worst part of that is that, you serve to potentially lose some people over that period of time. It's just like with any business. If you're not activating on your customers and they forget about who you are, they might lose some interest, and they might go do something else, whether that's playing another sport or playing no sport at all. So some of the discussions that we've had with them and with some other leagues around is facilitating esports tournaments for the kids to play against each other. And the common question is always like, hey, we play golf. Does it have to be a golf game? Is there an AFL game? Et cetera, et cetera. And the answer is it doesn't have to be a specific game that's related to your sport. Sometimes it's just not feasible to be able to do that. Sometimes the game isn't set up in a way that you can run a tournament, and you just want to keep the kids interactive and engaged. And maybe that's a fortnight tournament if you're a soccer community, or even a lawn bowls community. Maybe that's a fortnight tournament between the kids or the adults that play in your league, just for people to keep in contact, keep in touch, but also, represent their local team as they play.
Yeah, and Andrew Walton in a previous episode talked about that very thing with Tennis Australia holding an esport tournament at the venue, at the Tennis Australia venue, and I think that was fortnight, nothing to do with tennis. So that's an interesting dynamic. But the benefit is keeping people together, keeping them engaged, team versus team, local rivalries, running your fixture as you normally would, creating the routine, keeping that concept of club and team together. So,
hey Steve, if I can interject for a sec, Chris, what beyond the scope of kind of recovering, I guess, from COVID and trying to keep people engaged and working with your clubs, why should sports and sports clubs care about esports? What beyond just recovery and an opportunity there?
Yeah, a lot of it really is just, like I said, maintaining that contact, but also maintaining relevance, with the kids, giving them what they like, giving them another touch point to, foster a good community together. And also potentially for raising money, throughout the future period of time. We're talking to one quite large league at the moment. And I don't know if they want to be named or not, but, in regards to economic response specifically, they want to use an entry fee because they've refunded the capitation fees, to all of their players because they can't, fund anything right now. So they're looking to use esports and gaming as a way to get some of those entry fees back in to provide some quality. But a lot of the time it's just, giving the kids what they want. And like you were saying, Steve, with what Andrew has said in the past, the Australian Open every year, in this year and last, has been running a fortnight competition. And they've seen some great success from that. I think their numbers from last year were 75% of all tickets sold for this fortnight event were for people who'd never been to the tennis before at all. And they purchase a ground pass, they come in, they play the tennis, and then they're able to then go off into into the other sections. And that was throughout the semifinals period of time is when that tournament happens. And what we're seeing with some of these local sports that we're talking to as well is allowing non-members to compete. Maybe at a higher price or something like that. But hey, maybe, you get the brothers and the sisters of the people who are playing to come in, or you just get some other random people as well. And that exposes them to, the welcoming community that you're able to provide, and hopefully pushes them into that traditional sport.
Yeah, cool. Hey, Emma, we'll come to your questions in just a moment. But if you're looking for Jason Mathers, he's in the office here, talking with Mike Ronke, plotting the downfall of every other Premier club with Cam Wallace. So you won't be able to get Header for another half hour or so. But just before we jump on to Emma, so just to put Emma in context, Chris, Emma's from Cricket Victoria. So we'll come at it from that context in a minute. But talking about the funding of the competition, I was really, with the accountant in me, was really interested in this side of it as well. And I was going, Rodio, well, what are the logistics? How many, if we created a competition, how many people could play? And you were saying it was between this and 1,000. Is that correct? Can we have 1,000 people paying $10 to enter a tournament?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, one community group we're talking with at the moment has something like 10,000, total members, and there is a capacity to do that. And it's because, like with any digital product, it's scalable and it's online, so people can, play from their home as long as they've got the equipment. They can play online throughout regular seasons, multiple nights a week if you want to. And there's also options too. Not only to just play 1v1. There are certain games where you can play 2v2, 3v3, 4v4, up to 6v6. And that allows you to field, there's not even 6 people on a court in basketball at a time, right? So it allows you to field like a proper team if you were doing that. Yeah,
and that sense of belonging and that camaraderie and that team spirit. So we'll pull into Emma's questions, and Cam, I'll hand over to you after that. But I'm not sure if you can see Emma's comments, but again, thinking at it from a local level and activating a grassroots, is it common to have group licensing? I'm thinking of what a startup pack for a traditional sport club might look like. So, great question, Emma. What, if a league, let's just call it a community league, did want to introduce that, what does that mean? What do they need? What do the players need, etc.?
Yeah, so I guess thinking about, some of the work we've done in the past, it's understanding what problem you're trying to solve first and foremost and how you want to activate on it. So if you're a more, I guess we're talking more at the grassroots level. So quite often it's how can I get my kids or players, depending on what level you are, playing in it. So then it's working with a group, say like us, to just kind of help to scope out that idea. It's unfortunate and fortunate at the same time that there's so many questions to answer, and usually that requires someone like us to get a little bit hands-on to just decide what the game should be, maybe what the entry fee should be, how many weeks the tournament can operate for. And a lot of those are questions that are dependent on how many people are going to play, what kind of entry fees are they looking to pay, and what kind of games are they interested in. So, with one community group that I mentioned before with, 10,000 kids, we're just sending out a survey with them with quite a few questions. It's just, garnering some of that interest. But if you were to boil it down really into its basics, generally what it becomes is a low to middle level entry fee, multiple week tournament where people can represent their footy club or their cricket club and playing by themselves or with a small group of friends against other clubs and other people.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I'll just pick up before I throw over to you, Cam. Vivian Drew, welcome to you. Chris, just for a little bit of background, Vivian's the president of Gliding Victoria and on the board with Gliding Australia. Oh, cool. And I think gliding, like motorsport, has been one of the early adopters because simulation. People have often got either the access, or they've got it in their homes, the simulators themselves, they've got access to it. So it wasn't a big leap to go from that simulation type exercise to going online. Is that how you see it as well?
Yeah, exactly. I've got a friend right now who's going through his private pilot's license, and he's been doing a lot of training in the past few years on flight simulators with a professional setup. And you see that in motor racing as well. Now, the simulators and the games like R Factor are so legitimate that you're seeing people actually run qualifiers for real teams through sim racing and gaming and esports. And, a direct example of that is a UK London boy called James Baldwin, who won a competition called the World's Fastest Gamer. And he won $1 million USD real life McLaren racing contract by winning a sim racing tournament. And they had some real racing stuff that came into that. But he has next to zero real life racing experience in the past, a little bit of go-karting, a little bit of some other stuff. But now he's racing, I think it's Formula 3, coronavirus dependent, obviously, for McLaren with $1 million behind him.
Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. And that gap's only going to continue to shrink with accessibility and what's on offer. The next Microsoft simulator that's coming out is probably going to change the simulation space forever. Really, like the technology that's going into it is just insane. So the barriers for people looking to get into gaming, they're shrinking every day. I have a more traditional question for you, Chris, which is probably one that you get asked a lot, but I still think it's reasonable to ask it, and that's about accessibility regarding violence in games and for concerns that people have about that. I think Fortnite, a lot of people will look at it on the surface, particularly parents, and there's a question over the violence factor, but can you explain and touch on why that sort of thing doesn't have to be a barrier for gaming participation and esports participation?
Yeah, sure. So, most games or all games that are released in Australia, just like movies, have an age rating that's attached to them, an age-appropriate rating. And it's a super common question, like you said, is around, violence. For example, one of the games that's more out there is Counter-Strike Global Offensive. It's a 5v5 game. One side is a terrorist, one side is a counter-terrorist. It's the aim of the terrorist to plant the bomb and make it explode, in a certain area of the map. And there's always contention around that. It's easily one of the most popular esports in the world, but there's always discussions around, would a Coca-Cola want to attach their brand to that? And some of the answers are often no, but also, CSGO as of midnight, I believe it was last night, is now on TV in Australia on 7 Mate. It's also on Sky Sport TV in New Zealand. They've been broadcasting for many years Counter-Strike on there. So they seem to be okay with that. The same way that you can play MA movies, on air or R movies, depending on what the channel and what the time frame is around that. So often it's really just up to the discussion internally for the sport to decide what they're comfortable with. And Fortnite seems to be one of the most casual and basic ones. It's been a phenomenon. 6-year-olds all over the world are playing the game. They're generally okay with it. There's not blood. It's not so much killing. They're more so eliminations where the player will disappear and things like that too. It's not grotesque in any way. So usually people are pretty okay with that. But looking even more casually, might be a game like Rocket League, which is essentially remote control cars playing soccer in a cage. And the worst that will happen is sometimes your car might blow up. But there's a crowd cheering, and you're just trying to hit the ball into the cage. So often it's a discussion that needs to happen with them. But a lot of the time talking to the big sports, they really want to stay away from anything like Counter-Strike or fighting games or something like that. But and this discussion often happens around MMA. The UFC is much more violent than Fortnite ever is, or pretty much any other game that you can play. But there's certain brands like Red Bull that will never sponsor a blood sport, and there's certain sponsors like Monster Energy who attach themselves extremely strongly not only to the UFC but to Bellator, its main competitor in the US.
And that brings in Andrew Walton. I feel intimidated by this conversation because I've got you here, Chris. Cameron knows what he's talking about, and Andrew Walton joining the conversation with foot in each camp of traditional and esports as well. And that links beautifully to Andrew, your question. What percentage of junior sports participation would be gaming? Would also be keen on gaming or esports. Have you got any feel for that with the work that you've done with the leagues?
Yeah, all of them.
Yeah, I was going to say it's got to be pretty much all encompassed.
Yeah, because a lot of my discussion with I'm a millennial. I'm 28, so my discussion with Gen Z, like 18-year-olds, they don't classify themselves as a gamer the same way that Victorian wouldn't necessarily classify themselves as a car driver, even though the majority of people drive a car because it's just expected. Or like I grew up in Tasmania. If you don't drive a car, you're stuffed. There's no trains and there's barely any buses. So the same way that, these people are like, of course I play Fortnite. Of course they play a bit of Minecraft. And it's just finding the right ways to activate on them within that. And that's where surveys really help, the discussions that we had, because we've done some work with schoolies in the past as well. And we have our own biases as to what the kids might like, but it's better just to listen to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And Cam, we had Nigel Smart from the Adelaide Crows talking about the legacy team, but also talking about all the Adelaide Crows footballers. He said they all game, they all are playing. It's just what they bring to the club, regardless of the football side of it. Kind of bringing it back to the competition, and Emma, the practicalities of implementation you bring about to the point around needing external expertise. I can imagine this is the number one barrier for local clubs, not having a suitably skilled, passionate volunteer. What should be the best way to get clubs start connecting with communities where they might be able to recruit suitably skilled and knowledgeable volunteers?
Yeah, it's a hard point, and I guess that's why there's a professional industry that exists for people to run this, in for-profit companies, because it's not straightforward. It's not easy. I was able to do it in the past, but it takes a lot of effort and many hours to run a tournament, and a lot of knowledge generally about what platforms to use, what games to use, and that kind of stuff. So I want to be too negative, but I would say there's some concern from me if just any random person tries to run an esports tournament, because sometimes it won't be run effectively and properly. And I guess that comes from, I've run probably, I don't know, somewhere between 35 tournaments in the past 12 years, I guess, myself in the industry. And there's a lot of learnings to take place. But I think the first and easiest place to start would just be to ask, who's a passionate gamer within your community. And you'll probably find that a lot of people will start to come out. Yeah.
And Cam, you've also run games. That would be your experience as well?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's not an easy bridge, but I do think the skill set exists in there. And I think my suggestion to clubs considering it is to start small and feel it out, because that's one of the beautiful things about gaming and esports. It's really scalable. You can start with 6 people. We were talking about Legacy the other week, about how they just started as a group of friends. There's no reason why you couldn't just have, if you've got a committee and the committee happens to all be gamers, or they're all just interested in learning about it, just have a committee tournament. Start there, see how it goes, feel it out, and then, maybe take the next step.
Yeah, exactly. There's no reason you can't start with a single Xbox in a locker room where people are playing 1v1, a tournament against each other, FIFA or something like that. Yeah, you can start small for sure.
And I was watching your live stream this morning, Chris, talking to the gentleman from Canada whose name just escapes me at the moment.
Ben Pfefferman.
Ben, yeah, and he was all about the live in-person, well, pre-COVID, live in-person gaming events and kind of that side of it. So that's just a different format. But the complexity, if we're going to run a 1,000-person tournament, Emma, for instance, is as you would probably look to in real traditional sport, you would look to use an event management company. I think that's what we would be looking for in gaming as well, and that's where, Chris, your side of your expertise and one of the things that Big Esport does. And do you want to just give us, you had two different organisations come to you, one a state body of a mid-sized sport, and one a really large junior sporting competition, as you said, with 10,000 people in it. So indicatively, what would it be costing roughly to host a tournament, and how long would that run for, and those sort of things, if we're looking just anecdotal costs?
Yeah, sure. So usually you can get a tournament up and running anywhere from 10 to 30K, depending on, how many people are competing in it, how many weeks the season is, what the entry fee structure is behind it, any sponsorship too. And a lot of that change doesn't necessarily come in the amount of players, but the amount of weeks and the amount of broadcast that's behind that. As anyone knows, broadcast is expensive because you've got to pay for time for multiple people to be sitting there, discussing something. I always or generally kind of go towards, maybe you don't need a broadcast, because who are you, who's going to watch the tournament? You're more focusing on the people that are actually playing in it. So maybe can be a token broadcast of just the finals or something like that, which we've talked about in the past. But yeah, ultimately, anywhere between that 10 to 30K mark can serve, that whole slew of people. And
that 30K mark included, in some instances, it included the prizes and and that's everything from end to end. So one of the bodies we talked to wanted to provide a prize pack because they wanted under 18s to play but didn't feel comfortable giving out cash prize. So they were going to work with their sponsors to provide a $500 to $1,000 prize pack of equipment to the people that won. And maybe there can be things based around that too. If it's a body that has clubs that play underneath it, maybe it can be a $2,000 donation to the club, plus the winning player themselves gets free entry fees for life or something like that. I think that would be a pretty interesting or intriguing proposition. Yeah, and then when you start to kind of and 10 to 30,000 does seem a bit of cash and a bit of a take back. But if you're starting to look at you might have 20 clubs, right? So then it's a $500, $600, $700 entry fee for their players, or it's $10, $20 for the players to come and participate, or something like that. So it's when you look at the economics, it's actually one of the associations was actually looking at it as a revenue driver, a revenue generator, and I think that can be a very logical and a low risk strategy for generating additional revenue. Yeah, they were looking at a $30 entry fee and anywhere from a $2,000 to $5,000 prize pool, and that's before any support from any sponsors or anything like that too. So that's 1,000 kids, for example, out of their 10,000 pool. So they feel pretty comfortable that they could drag at least that minimum in to play. And so really, if they were to engage you, and this is not a sales, by no means are we trying to sell your services here. That's not, this is an education discussion, but effectively for a peak body or the association, if they were to go down this path, they effectively just outsource everything, and all they've got to do then is just promote and market the competition. Is that how it works? Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, cool. Susanna, thank you so much. Again, Chris, just giving a little bit of background to the crowd that you're drawing. Susanna's from local council level, so Cumberland Shire in New South Wales. So, Susanna, welcome to you. I'm fascinated by esport and the whole dynamics and where it's going to go, and loved it. And Cam, unless you've got any questions, we've already gone.
Yeah, I think we're good. Yeah, it's a conversation that always feels like it just needs to keep going. There's just so much to unpack, but especially from the opportunities that exist for participant sports in Australia. But yeah, I think half an hour is pretty good. Plenty of information. It was great to see Steve's face light up, by the way, when you mentioned Rocket League. His face lit up like, I know what that is. So that was great.
Cameron's sport of choice. I was Cameron's sport of choice.
It's one of
But
the
you're
more
right,
frustrating games. Good
12
fun.
weeks ago, I wouldn't have had a clue what you're talking about. And to be fair, I'm only just hanging on as it is, to be honest. But Chris, thank you so much. People, if you want to check out Chris's Big Esport website, the link is in the post. Chris, you are prolific on LinkedIn particularly. So how can people find you?
Yeah, no worries. I mean, I got a pretty common name, but if you use the LinkedIn URL finder, you can type in Smithy Mayo, which is a combination of my last name and my gaming name, and you can find me in that same URL on Twitter or Instagram as well. But most active on LinkedIn for sure.
Yeah, fantastic, Chris. Thank you so much for your time, particularly because you've been on air all morning as it is. So
no worries. Time for lunch.
Thank you so much for your time, and Cameron, as ever, well done to you, mate. And we will keep going with this conversation because I think the convergence of traditional and esport is to begin.
Oh, he's back. He's back.
And
we lost him. We got him back.
And Chris, I did notice that you didn't use your fancy lights for this one. You just in the white light studio.
Yeah, it's the unfortunate part of going back to the office and then coronavirus cases peaking, so wanting to stay at home and then just equipment being all over the place. But thankfully, I got my trusty microphone here, so got most of the setup good to go.
Yes. All right. Brilliant. All right. So that's it for this week with Sports Community Live Stream. Next week, I am just super excited we start on Wednesday doing sport differently. A pilot program, 5-week pilot program, really supported by Vic Health. So we thank them unbelievably, where we look at a case study of 5 clubs over 5 weeks who are using different recruitment strategies, different formats, different ideas to recruit people into their sport. And I'm really, really excited. These are some of the most inspirational people I've spoken to in sport coming up over the next 5 weeks. So that's doing sport differently Wednesday, which is a little bit different to eSport Friday, and we'll work out themes for the rest of the week, Cam. I'm Steve Pallas. Chris Smith, thank you very much. Cameron, I look forward to your mum's feedback next week, and finish the week off with Go Tigers and Melbourne Storm. What a game last night. Good night and goodbye to everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Bye now.
Thanks, Chris.